Welcome into the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Nick Whalen, Joe Bartel here with you in the same room.
I know.
Joe, I'm sitting like 3 feet away from you. We are out at the Circa Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. It is football contest weekend. This is your last chance, really, if you want to enter Circa Millions, if you want to enter Circa Survivor. I think we got, 16 mil combined on the line?
Just a little bit of money.
Just a little bit of money on the line here this year out at Circa. I know Jeff and Alan, they're going to do Circa Survivor. I'm going to get my Circa Million entry in later today as well. Very much looking forward to that. Speaking of, Joe, we do a lot of business with Circa. They're a sponsor of the pod. The biggest pro football contests in Vegas are back, Circa Survivor and Circa Million, now up to confirmed 16 million in guaranteed prizes. 2 ways to win and no rake. Circa Survivor contestants select one team each week with no point spread. You know how Survivor works. Last the longest, win it all. $10 million guaranteed in the Circa Survivor contest this year. In Circa Millions, pretty simple. You make 5 picks against the spread each week for your share of $6 million guaranteed. They also have quarterly and full season payouts. And I think there's even like $250K on the line if you finish dead last. So good luck. It should be 50-50 either way. But go enter in Nevada. Play from anywhere. Go to circasports.com for details. All right, Joe, we're talking running backs. We got a bunch of live pods going off this week. We're going to do some positional previews. We'll talk about some news as well. But you and I are told we got to stick to running backs. So that's what we'll do. We don't want to go name by name here. We'll try to keep this to a tight 45. We don't have all day. But I want to start with some strategy talk overall, Joe. You've done a ton of drafts, probably even more than I have. Both of us have been working the best ball streets since February. But starting to get into some more season long, some more different formats as far as those season long drafts go. What has been your primary running back strategy so far?
Yeah, so I think the idea of hero running back, you take 2 running backs early, the zero running back strategy, we've heard all those names before, and predominantly, whether it be myself or others, I think the hero running back strategy has been the prevailing one now across the floor. And that's certainly changed over the past week and a half after we had news on Christian McCaffrey's hamstring injury, the CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase holdouts, Tyreek Hill just the other day wearing a brace in his hand. I mean, we're talking about the top 5 picks having some sort of trepidation with it, which now affects. I mean, I saw you in one of our invitational leagues take Breece Hall relatively early. I wouldn't fault anyone taking for Bijan Robinson early. The strategy among running backs, especially in the first 24 picks, isn't so much who do you like or don't like. I think you can like Jahmyr Gibbs or Saquon Barkley to varying level degrees, and those are the late first round, early second round guys. It's where are you picking in the draft? If you're picking early, do you want to take a Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson like you did in your draft early on? Right. Will they fall in the middle rounds, which I think at this point is what people are crossing their fingers for? And that was something that when we were doing our podcast back in March or May, that was just an automatic that you could get one of those guys to fall there. So I think the question is, do you want to have, or where are you drafting? And based off of that, what's happening in the second round? Are you going to be able to get in Isaiah Pacheco, who's been rising up the boards over the past, 10 days or so? Do you wait for a Kyron Williams, Devon Etienne to fall to you at a certain spot? Yeah. I love Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry. Those are now not quite late second round picks, certainly not Jacobs. But that's the answer to the question is, what are you doing in the second round? Not so much the first.
And I think you bring up a good point, which is the trepidation, to use your word, around so many of these elite receivers, right? I mean, we are, exactly 2 weeks out from opening night, and CeeDee Lamb is still not with the Dallas Cowboys and is still tweeting emojis that seem to be directed at Jerry Jones. And, I've kind of settled on Tyreek Hill being the safest of those elite receivers, but he's also the oldest of those. And, somebody who didn't miss a ton of time last year, but was in and out of so many games, especially down the stretch. Felt like every single game, either him, Waddle, or both were, in and out. He's missing a couple series. Like, is he actually injured? Is he fully going to be there for 17 games? I still think Hill's the safest. I think CeeDee Lamb, to me, if that contract gets done in the next 2 weeks, I don't really have any significant concerns. I mean, he is so far and away the number one option for that Cowboys offense that is, once again, as they did last season, going to rely so heavily on that Dak and Lamb connection. But you're right about, those running backs. Now, you used to be able to get Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson with the 7th or the 8th or even the 9th pick. I'm looking at NFFC ADP right now over the last week. Both of those guys are going essentially at pick 4 on average. So you got McCaffrey, who's still your default 1-1. It's certainly not as rock solid as it was a month ago. You still see CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill 2 and 3, and then Hall and Robinson are kind of battling for that 4th overall spot. If I have a chance to take Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson in the early to middle first round, I found myself doing that certainly more lately, and I've leaned more toward Breece Hall. And part of it is I don't want to play that roulette game in round 2.
Right.
Okay, if I take a receiver here, what if I get locked out of Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs? It's like, do I feel like all of a sudden, I end up reaching for a running back who I don't like quite as much? I'm not a huge Kyron Williams guy. I'm not a huge Devon Etienne guy. So if you remove them from the equation in the second round, all of a sudden it's like, all right, Travis Etienne or Derrick Henry, who to me are on a slightly lower tier than those other 3 names. So if I have a chance to lock up Breece Hall early on, I'm a lot more confident doing that, I suppose I should say, than I was a few weeks ago. Now, looking at that secondary tier.
Well, can I pause? Because I think, I'll pull back the curtain a little bit. We, the Circa boys, all 5 of us here last night, pulled over for burgers at the resort, and we're having just impromptu conversation about this. And I think it's really interesting, even though we're doing a running back talk, that the receivers are the direction that you want to decide for your running back. So you just said, I'll take a Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall early because I want to make sure I'm getting the receivers I like at the back end of the second round. I think I'm trending the other way, that I want a CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Jefferson, St. Brown, one of those guys that's been easily among the eight picks. I like those receivers more than the tier that comes back, especially back in the second round, Mike Evans, DJ Moore, that group. And maybe I do need to be more aggressive, taking a Pacheco beginning of the second round, or middle second round, or taking a Josh Jacobs or Kyron Williams. And yes, I'm eating an ADP slide, or I'm being aggressive getting one of those running backs, but I like that receiver group in the early first round more than I would at that. And you could play that scenario out, I think, really through the first 10 picks. Once it gets to that Garrett Wilson, AJ Brown range of you're deciding between those guys, well, then you can probably get a Saquon Barkley or Jonathan Taylor to fall back to. You don't have to worry so much about the conversation. But the strategy among what do you do with Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey isn't so much do you like those guys or not. It's how much do you like that round 2, early 3 receiver group in those first picks.
No, that's fair. True. That's true. And I think especially if you're picking, let's say, 3rd overall in your draft, and you go running back there, like I'd almost rather, in a vacuum, take Travis Etienne or Derrick Henry, but I don't want to start 2 running backs, in most formats. So then are you then forced into a spot where you're taking a receiver who you don't like just because you feel like you need to fill that roster spot?
And that goes back to the reaching thing too, right? Because I think of like an Etienne as a top 20 pick might seem high in certain ADPs, but if you like him, that's fine. But then does Derrick Henry fall to you? Does my guy Josh Jacobs fall to me in the 3rd round? And then you're starting a scenario where you're having 2 running backs within the first 3 picks, which you might not have planned to do. It goes, and we have a really great tool on RotoWire, the ADP report. Again, you can get a RotoWire subscription, rotowire.com/pod, gets you 48 hours of access. So you can see the tools that we're talking about. But whether it be on ESPN or Yahoo or NFL.com, My Fantasy League, we do a lot. The ADPs are so dramatically different on different sites that you almost need to know what platform you're drafting on and the ADPs that are going to happen accordingly. It might be the only time in the nearly 10 years that I've been working at RotoWire at this level that I would say doing a mock draft on your site, like a mock draft, one of those fake ones that the computers all do, especially with AI now, that might be more beneficial than doing a best ball or anything else, because you're able to learn that ADP more. It isn't so much I'm worried about starting Derrick Henry or Isaiah Pacheco 2-3 turn. It's, well, what's going to be available later on, and the platforms really dictate that outcome, I think.
All right. So do you have any more commentary on that top group of running backs? I think we know what the upside is with Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson. I think Jonathan Taylor, to me, feels about as rock solid as it gets as an end of the first round, maybe early second round pick. I think everybody knows the risk reward with Saquon Barkley. We know the risk reward with Jahmyr Gibbs. So let's get into what I would consider that true second tier, maybe the 3rd tier, if you want to count Hall and Bijan as their own. Travis Etienne, Derrick Henry, Kyron Williams, all these guys essentially go back to back to back in ADP at the NFFC. Devon Etienne is in that crew as well. And then there is still a slight gap down to Isaiah Pacheco. But like you said, we're seeing Pacheco jump up significantly, especially in the NFC over the last week. He's now up to the 25th overall pick. Is he deserving of joining that tier?
Yeah, so the tier is pretty expansive, and it goes over like 14 or 15 picks with a few of those receivers mixed in who have less complications than CeeDee Lamb or Jamar Chase, but certainly less upside. So I think it's tricky. I mean, I've been pounding the table now for 4 months at this point, and I'm not touching Devon Etienne. We're here at Circa Sports Radio Row. I think 15 other different places are going to talk about the upsides for Devon Etienne, and I understand that. I completely get it.
We're here to talk about the downside.
It's the sexy thing. Yes, well, I'm Mr. Pessimism, right? I'll point out all the negative parts of it. Jalen Wright, I think, is a really talented player in his own right. Raheem Mostert had 15-plus touchdowns, whatever it was. Like, there are so many good running backs in that backfield. And, oh, by the way, they're still going to be really pass heavy under Mike McDaniel and Tua and Tyreek and a lot. I don't want anything to do with Devon Etienne. I'll take Josh Jacobs ahead of him right now. I know the ADP is different. Etienne, Pacheco, Kyren Williams doesn't matter. And I've mentioned my reservations about Kyren Williams too. I'm never one of the draft capital matters guys. I always think that's sort of a lame way of analysis. But the Rams drafted Blake Corum, especially with all the needs they have along the defense, for a reason, because they think he's a more proven version and a more sturdy and durable version of Kyren Williams in that backfield. Yeah. I think they're going to split time right away. And if and when Kyren Williams, who has 5 lower leg injuries already thus far in his career, gets injured again, inevitably, it will happen. Blake Corum is going to be the 3-down back for that team, and we know that matters. We just saw Kyren Williams last year. So those two fall pretty far, at least to my rankings of running backs. And James Cook, I guess like the Isaiah Pacheco's for sure, but it gets in that James Cook range of tier of running backs where I'll then consider taking Kyren Williams and or Devon Etienne, which I know is way further than their ADP.
Kyren Williams is such an interesting case to me, and he's not quite as polarizing as Etienne, partially because he's just a different type of player. He's a little more quote unquote boring than Etienne, but the workload thing that you brought up, I mean, that is the main sticking point for me. 19 carries a game last season. Like, that's just, it's not happening. Like, teams don't want to give a running back 19 carries a game. I don't care how good said running back is. That's just not, it's not a winning strategy, right? That's how you end up missing time. You end up overworking someone like Kyren Williams. And I don't see Blake Corum outright stealing this job. I certainly have more Corum exposure than I do Williams at this point, but it's not under the belief that, all right, week 5, all of a sudden Blake Corum is the guy carrying the ball 15 times a game. I think it's it could be 75-25. And even that is a marked downcrease from what we saw from Kyren Williams last year. And I'm not saying he's just an all volume compiler type, but getting 19 carries a game absolutely helps. And if he goes down to 14 or 15 carries per game, is he worth it at that spot in the second round? I'm not sure he is. I think the Rams made the Blake Corum pick for a reason, not to replace Kyren Williams, but to supplement him.
Let's play it out. So for Kyren Williams to reach his ADP that he's currently at, again, let's just say mid-second round pick. I know it's different by platform, but let's just go off of that generality. You need Kyren Williams to do basically the exact same workload, and maybe he misses those 3 or 4 games that he had like last year with that high ankle sprain. Okay. Do we think the Rams are taking a 3rd-round running back to then just have Kyren Williams touch the ball 22 times as a passer and a runner? My answer is no. I think that there's a clear and obvious reason as to why Corum was on that team, was drafted where he was, and it's to make sure that Kyren Williams gets spelled a bit more, doesn't run as much risk for those lower body injuries, that his 80-pound or 180-pound frame doesn't take on as many opportunities as it did. You can like Kyren Williams more than Blake Corum. I'm not debating that merit. It's just that Blake Corum already is going to have value. And even if he doesn't, we did this concept a couple of years ago with Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison. And Alexander Mattison was like a round 10 pick because he could just fill in case Dalvin Cook got injured. That's the scenario that I think Blake Corum has. But we're jumping tiers with my Blake Corum love. It's more on Kyren Williams. I think Isaiah Pacheco, clear 3-down back, right? Like the way that this Chiefs backfield is breaking out. Etienne has 0 competition. Don't talk to me about Tank Bigsby or Dearness Johnson. Those guys are nothing burgers behind Etienne. So I think Blake Corum cuts into Kyren Williams' workload. Isaiah Pacheco, Etienne, clear starters. I think Josh Jacobs is a clear 3-down back, even though the prevailing public does not seem to agree with me on that. And that's where it becomes the issue, where Devon Etienne and Kyren Williams, both comfortably going ahead of these guys that we're talking about, they're obviously, definitively going to split work. And I don't understand why the market is the way it is with those two guys.
All right, I want to talk more Travis Etienne in a moment, but we got a message from our friends over at Fantrax. Is there something you wish your fantasy league had, or features that are missing from your current leagues? Maybe bonus scoring, custom schedules, or playoffs, deeper team settings? Well, look no further, because we got you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Fantrax even offers college football fantasy leagues. Create or join the Fantasy Football Commission League right now. Invite your friends. Dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top dynasty football league platform in the industry. Are you coming from another service? Not a problem. Fantrax can easily import all of your current leagues and rosters. Ever have a trade go wrong, make a mistake, drop in a player? Fantrax commission tools allow you to undo any move with one simple click. Fantrax is running a special promotion you don't want to miss right now. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/RotoWire. Do that right now. Enter for your chance to win tickets to any regular season NFL game for you and your entire league. Plus $6,000 in spending cash. That's right. Ticket for your entire league. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing leagues for more chances to win. Go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. All right, we won't go too deep on Travis Etienne, Joe, as I sit here in my Jacksonville Jaguars hat. But we have not talked a lot of Etienne, right? And I think he's one of those backs that everybody just kind of universally agrees, like, yeah, all right, late second round. I feel okay about that. Another back who, like Kyren Williams, had a massive workload last season. I will say there has been a concerning amount of positive upswell on Tank Bigsby so far in camp. They said he looks like a new man. He's not dropping every pass that's thrown to him. He's not fumbling every time he touches the ball. I don't know if I trust that. Tank Bigsby was such a glaring minus for the Jags, who so badly, when they're running Travis Etienne into the middle of the line 24 times a game at the end of the year, it's like they needed somebody else so badly, and they still didn't trust Tank Bigsby. I think they're going to give him a chance in year 2. I still don't know that this is a significant enough workload split that it really concerns me when it comes to Etienne.
Yeah, and I don't even know about the workload part of things. It's that Prez Taylor and Doug Peterson are still debating as to who's calling plays, or at least we haven't got that information yet. I know you as a Jags fan are shaking your head because we're talking about kneecapping an offense if it is Prez Taylor, again, kind of operating things. Etienne was like a 3rd, 4th round pick last year who I was all in on because Tank Bigsby is not very good. And now that he is more like a 18 to 24 overall pick, it gets me a little bit concerned. But the situation really, I don't think, has changed much. And frankly, there is room for it to get better, right? If it is Doug Peterson in a make or break year as a head coach calling the plays, an offensive coordinator essentially that we know and have way more comfort in, especially dating back to the Eagles side of things. Yeah, I mean, that's where Etienne is. The lights up, but you could feel very comfortable saying Etienne's going to get close to 1,000 yards. He's going to be a pass catcher. And there's a lot of worst case scenarios that played out last year that I just think, what are the odds it happens 2 years ago? Now, to be fair, you could say, hey, the worst case scenario for the Chargers has been X, Y, and Z get injured. Well, it's been 10 years running. Some franchises, like your favorite one, Nick, are just doomed to make dumb decisions or have dumb things happen to them. And maybe this is the case where Etienne is just going to be handicapped again. I just don't like the idea of paying up for a bad scenario when last year was a similar bad scenario and we didn't have to pay that premium. So that's my concern. But Kyren Williams, way sexier option. Devon Etienne, way sexier. Etienne, it's the steady thing. Like it's the layup that you're going to be able to have as a comfortable running back one. And the downsides aren't as prevalent as Kyren Williams and I think Devon Etienne are presenting. So that's one of those where I don't blame anyone if you want to take Devon Etienne or Kyren over Travis Etienne. But you're right, we haven't talked about him enough because it is sort of ho-hum, sort of boring, and not nearly as sexy upside as the other two guys.
My hope is that Jacksonville's offensive line hit rock bottom last year.
Right.
The reports out of camp are that it still has not been great. That comes for both run blocking as well as protecting Trevor Lawrence. So maybe that's a little bit of wish casting by me, but this was PFF's 31st ranked run blocking team last year. And, I think Travis Etienne still had the year he had only because of volume. He went from 5.1 yards per carry as a rookie to 3.8 last season, but still had 11 touchdowns, partially because they just kept hammering him, even though he was, it's first and goal from the 2, and he might need 3 tries to get there, but he was getting all of those tries. I don't think it's in the Jags' best interest for him to carry the ball 267 times again. I think what you're hoping for is a decline in carries, and you're trading off an increase in efficiency. The question is to what level, right? But can this offensive line be competent enough to even get him closer to 4.2, 4.5 yards per carry? I mean, he's not getting back to 5.1. Like that's not happening.
He is the talented enough player to do that. I want to be clear. It's not like Etienne's lost a step. It's the situation. And does that get you? Does the offensive line look better if it's Doug Peterson calling plays too? I think
it has to.
I think it has to, right? That's where I go back to. There has to be a more positive scenario, but we don't know. And it doesn't seem like we are going to know until the end of draft season, if not start week 1, 2, 3. That might be one of those where whoever drafts Etienne as a top 24 pick gets frustrated. Then we hear Doug Peterson in week 5 is like, oh, I'm going to get fired, or I make the play calling. Fine, I'll do it. And then I would want to acquire Etienne at 75 cents to the dollar, that might be the more strategic play in this scenario.
Yeah. Etienne also played 180 more snaps last season than he did in 2022. And, I will say before we close the book on him, we saw the increased pass catching volume that we wanted. And again, part of that is just he was constantly on the field, like almost to the point where it was concerning for him health wise. But 58 catches, 476 yards last year, only one receiving touchdown. I think that's a number that you look and say, okay, maybe it doesn't get you 11 rushing touchdowns. Maybe there are some, I wouldn't say volume concerns, but just, maybe the workload is scaled back. But I do think the pass catching is real. I think that was something watching the Jags in 2022. It's like, why are you not utilizing this more? I mean, you saw this collection for years at Clemson, right? And Etienne to me is just as dangerous catching the ball out of the backfield. So I think that is something that will sustain. Let's look at the kind of next tier of running backs here, Joe. So we're talking Rachaad White, we're talking Josh Jacobs, we're talking James Cook. We're going to throw Joe Mixon in there as well. Sure. Those are 4 running backs who at the NFFC right now go about 8.5, 9 picks apart. How do you rank those 4? I assume I know who's number 1.
Well, is Kamara in that group too? Because to me, whenever I'm making this decision, from based off the NFFC ADP,
Kamara is a little bit lower. He's a round plus behind that first group, White and Jacobs. But if you want to throw him in there, we can. Sure.
I'm going to, because I always see whoever takes Rachaad White, the next person takes Alvin Kamara, and it could be like 10 picks ahead of the ADP.
Alvin Kamara in ADP over the last
week, and I saw Ken Walker go in the 3rd round on Alan Sazowski's.
My goodness.
Beat Alan Sazowski in FFC competition, which I thought was crazy. But the Kenneth Walker thing is a separate conversation. I actually really like him as a player, and that was one of those that I talked with Jim Coventry probably 4 months ago about the concept of Kenneth Walker being relative way higher than his 5th round ADP. I still kind of like him where he's at currently. But to your point with this tier, yes, it's Josh Jacobs, and I've spent so much different airwaves and lung breath. Is lung breath a thing?
No.
No, it's not. Okay, fine. I'll let it be. I've spent a lot of time talking about Josh Jacobs for his fantasy value. He's clearly above this group tier wise, but the James Cook stuff, the Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, I think I'm even more in on Joe Mixon than I am Rachaad White or James Cook. And maybe that's asinine for a lot of people. If you want to say that Mixon's on his last legs, I'm not really pushing against that idea. I'm doing I'm out 1 year too early, 1 year too late thing on Alvin Kamara. I'm doing it on Nick Chubb. I'm not doing that for Joe Mixon, so maybe there's a bit of hypocriticalness coming into play, but that offense is going to be one of the best in the league. It's the same concept I have for Josh Jacobs, and it applies more so in a dome scenario like Houston for Joe Mixon. Dameon Pierce is not it. I like Jawar Jordan for what he is as a draft pick or UDFA guy. He's not going to factor into this. It's Mixon's backfield for the entirety of the season so long as he's healthy. And he proved last year in a similar spot with Cincinnati, he can produce at an effective fantasy level, and I think is a value where his current ADP is. You're drafting the Rachaad Whites, the Alvin Kamaras, that tier of running back at cost for like what you think their floor can be. And I think Mixon has a similar floor, but a ceiling that maybe exceeds that by, let's just say, 6 or 7 ADP points, which is why he is Josh Jacobs and Joe Mixon in my mind in that tier.
Yeah, with Mixon, running back switching teams late in their careers, it could go either way, right? It's like I'm not excited about Austin Eckler going from LA to Washington. I'm starting to cool off considerably on Aaron Jones going from Green Bay to Minnesota. Those are, to me, clear downgrades in situation. I think this is a lateral move for Joe Mixon. He's not going to a worse situation. This is a guy who led the NFL in red zone carries last season, and I don't think it's that crazy that he could do it again this year. It's unlikely, but he's in the right offense for it, right? He's not going from Cincinnati to Pittsburgh or some team that we don't feel good about, right? It's like he's going from one really good offense to what could be an even better offense, or at least just as good of an offense in Houston. So, I think the pushback that you might see for Joe Mixon is, well, there's so many mouths to feed, right? It's are they going to even have time to run the ball with Joe Mixon? So yeah, I think they will. I'm more concerned about what it means, who's getting marginalized in that receiving core. I think it'll end up being Tank Dell. But you're right. I mean, Joe Mixon is clearly the guy that you're not concerned at all about. Dameon Pierce still having something to say here.
No, he has underperformed in the preseason. I would be super surprised if the Texans. I would be surprised if the Texans are trading for somebody. That's where I could see the Texans acquiring a Khalil Herbert or an Elijah Mitchell. Any one of those running backs that seem to be available. That's the tier that I would assume they could go after, especially when it gets to preseason cut down days. So it's my belief that Dameon Pierce is not only not it, he rated for the Texans or CBS from a Packers perspective. I sooner assume it's going to look that way, which is why Joe Mixon is the attractive option that he is to me. It's why I want to have him, especially, and I took him in the NFFC at the end of the fourth round as my running back one. If you're fading those early tiers, that first 12 or so running backs, Mixon makes complete sense to be your running back one, getting that next tier in round 6, 7, 8 as a running back two. I feel comfortable at that level for Mixon to do that.
All right. Are you okay if we skip the Josh Jacobs talk and just direct
I've done it a million times.
We'll direct everyone to any previous RotoWire podcast that Joe has been on if you want the full Josh Jacobs breakdown. But I vowed that we would not go player by player, so I want to make sure we're not doing that. I mentioned Ken Walker's rise in ADP. He is now ahead of Alvin Kamara. He's closing in on Joe Mixon, going about pick 50 on average. That makes him the running back 16 at the NFFC. And like Joe mentioned earlier, make sure you take a look at the ADP on the site that you're going to use. If you're preparing for a home league draft and it's on ESPN, look at the ESPN ADP because it's going to be a little bit different. And Ken Walker actually goes a little bit higher in ESPN leagues right now than he does in the NFFC, where you typically see some of those receivers pushed up early on. I'm totally fine with Kenneth Walker. I think he's still the clear starter in Seattle. I've been a little bit higher on Zach Charbonnet as a later round pairing with Ken Walker. I think both of those guys are going to have a say in Seattle. To me, it's closer. Again, it's certainly Kenneth Walker's job, but it's closer to a true timeshare than it is a clear one and clear two. I really think they want to get Charbonnet involved. I think this will be a more diverse offense where both of these guys have roles. I think they're going to be significantly more up-tempo, which is great for fantasy. I mean, I've said it a million times. This team was dead last in pace of play last year. They were dead last in offensive plays run. Despite being a pretty good offense and consistently picking up, first downs, they were not a great third down team overall, but obviously scoring wise, they were fine. They were competitive. That's one of those stats that you would be like, oh, Carolina's probably dead last in plays. No, Seattle was playing that slowly last year, and I think that changes. So there will be just more on the table for both of these backs. But what do you think accounts for this rise for Kenneth Walker?
Yeah, now Shane Waldron is the coach for the Bears, and we're all excited about Caleb Williams. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I love all the receivers there. I get what could happen, but maybe we should take a pause and look at that. And to be clear, I'm not that worried, but it is just interesting to note with the Seahawks. I think it's because Kenneth Walker is emerged as a 3-down capable back, and that this new regime just seems to want to do things a little bit differently than what Pete Carroll wanted to do. And there's optimism involved. I don't know. Jake Latarsky and I, who do the Tuesday podcast every week, we'll do our over/under win totals for every team. I think it's going to be next week. I'm probably taking the under on the Seahawks win totals. I just don't have any faith that team is going to function. But maybe it's pessimism for Geno Smith. Maybe I think that Tyler Lockett's going to finally run out, and Jackson Smith and Jigba doesn't quite live up to the post-sleep but still hype that seems to be happening here. It's like round 2 of the sleeper hype that's happening with him. There's a lot of reservations. I think Kenneth Walker is a really good prospect. I also think Zach Charbonnet is a really good prospect. And you don't draft a running back in the second round like they did with Charbonnet to just have him be cut or not functioning the same way unless he really has fallen out of favor with this new group, which maybe is the case. I also have a tough time deciphering what the beat reporter hype is or how to analyze that without understanding they're there to talk positively about the Seahawks or dramatically negative about the Seahawks because that will get them views, clicks, listens, and therefore more money. Like that angle of things makes me nervous. And I loved Kenneth Walker much more when he was in the range of Aaron Jones and James Conner and Joe Mixon. And if you're saying Kenneth Walker now becomes in that range of Rashad White and James Cook, it isn't even so much I like him more or less than those running backs. It's I like a receiver in that range, or I like my roster builds when I'm getting the running back 2 later on.
Let's go into that range now. So we're talking a good 15, 16 picks difference between where you see Aaron Jones and David Montgomery and James Conner and Ramondre Stevenson come off the board versus where Walker is now going around pick 50. I want to ask you about Jones versus Montgomery specifically, 2 backs in the NFC North. If I have that choice, I've been going David Montgomery almost exclusively.
Interesting.
I was earlier in the offseason, I was a lot more in on Aaron Jones. I think it was part of it was just
me.
Part of it was you. Part of it was those last 5 games of the season where you're like, this was the Aaron Jones, that we've kind of been waiting for to get healthy all year. But we talked about Joe Mixon going from one good situation to another. This is a clear downgrade to me for Aaron Jones, going from Green Bay, which we think could be one of the best offenses in the NFL, to a Minnesota team that is now indefinitely quarterbacked by Sam Darnold. Could be Nick Mullins at some point. The injury history for Aaron Jones is very concerning to me. Specifically, the type of injuries that he suffered, the amount of knee injuries, the soft tissue injuries to his lower body. He'll be 30 this season. On a per game basis, Aaron Jones to me has always been undervalued. He's been one of the best running backs in the NFL. I think you see the flash. You saw how valuable he was for Green Bay at the end of the year. But this is not quite Austin Eckler levels of pessimism for me.
Sure.
But I don't think that same ceiling is going to be there for Aaron Jones. And if I'm shopping for a second running back, if I take one early, or maybe even a third running back if I'm a little bit more aggressive, I find myself defaulting to the security and the floor of David Montgomery over Aaron Jones.
So let's do this backwards. The security and safety of David Montgomery makes complete sense in the world. Do you have the same security and safety from Najee Harris?
No.
Okay. No. We'll get into that. DeAndre Swift.
Some level of safety, but I think a lower floor and a lower ceiling.
James Conner or Ramondre Stevenson?
James Conner versus Aaron Jones to me is very interesting because
I'm not doing that. I'm doing James Conner or David Montgomery. Ramondre Stevenson or David Montgomery.
I want to talk about Ramondre separately in a bit. So let's table that one. But no, I would still default to Montgomery. I think James Conner to me is very similar to Aaron Jones in that the spike weeks are going to be there. When things are going good, things are going really good.
Yep.
But I want the week-to-week floor of Montgomery. I want pieces of that Detroit offense, which I still think it is a run-based offense. They have one receiver who they trust, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. You have a great tight end, obviously, in Sam Laporta. I'm kind of off Jameson Williams this year. I can't say that too loud. Derek Stevens is walking around here, but I don't think Jameson Williams is a true big-time wide receiver two in the NFL, not yet, at least. And I think you look at Montgomery and you say, is the touchdown regression coming for him? And it could be. It likely will. But, Jahmyr Gibbs is already banged up. I think this offense will be just as good, if not better, than it was last season. I think Detroit could lead the league in scoring. And this is still a team that when they get within the 20-yard line, within the 5, within the 10, they trust David Montgomery. He was the guy last year. And, yeah, Jahmyr Gibbs, gives you a little something different. Look at the efficiency numbers from rushes inside the 5, inside the 10. David Montgomery blew him out of the water. Like, he's still going to be that guy.
So my point with asking the James Connors and Ramondre Stevenson of the world isn't so much that I disagree with your statement on Montgomery. In fact, I do. Especially because the Lions have, I think, either 14 or 15 of their 17 games in a dome of some sort. And that's going to insulate Jared Goff, who is my biggest concern of that offense. And would be the only reason why they don't achieve the level that you're mentioning. It's just that I think Najee Harris and you could say Ramondre Stevenson, although I'm not really in that mark. DeAndre Swift. There's like 4 guys that you can get almost 12 picks, if not later, that I think get 85, 90% of what David Montgomery could do from that safety perspective. What I want to do in round 6 or round 5, wherever it is for Aaron Jones, is what everyone does with Devon Etienne in round 2. Well, man, this is the super sexy thing. Like, think about the upside, even though there's a lot of prevailing issues, which we talked about with Devon Etienne. I'll do that in round 5. That feels a lot safer to me. And maybe there's more prevailing issues. Like you talked about, the offense is worse with the Vikings this year. I don't think the downgrade between McCarthy and Sam Darnold is that significant, if at all different.
I do agree with you on that.
I think Darnold might make the offense better. And I think Kevin O'Connell is a good enough offense coordinator, the same way that we talk about Kevin Stefanski for the Browns, that they'll more or less do what you want and what you can project each and every year. I think Aaron Jones is going to get the totality of the workload. Ty Chandler is not a good backup. Kenny Nwangu is a good return man, nothing else. And the Vikings have to use Aaron Jones to be successful. They probably aren't making the playoffs, but if you want your offense to look competent, Aaron Jones is the guy. And there's no reason for them not to, because he's only on a 1-year deal. You could theoretically get a compensatory pick, even of the 4th or 5th round variety, if he ends up getting signed by somebody else next year. I think there's every incentive for the Vikings to run Aaron Jones into the ground, and it makes their division rivals look bad, who cut Aaron Jones and didn't use him that way. So I think he is one of their best pass catchers. We know Sam Darnold's checking the ball down, and without Hawkinson, that intermediate level, that yards 4 through 12, is wide open. You want Jefferson and Jordan Addison to threaten defenses down the field, to create more space for the rest of your offense to operate, to create more space for Aaron Jones. So I think he's the upside play that everyone thinks Devon Etienne is, but with a 40-round less high price tag. I love Aaron Jones, or just overall taking risks in that range over Dave Montgomery's ceiling.
I think you laid out a fair argument. I mean, I will say Aaron Jones is 8 years older than Devon Etienne. So I just like this breakout idea to me.
It's an ageism thing. Stop it. You're going to get fired.
David Montgomery had 1 single point week last year, in PPR, and that was a game that he got hurt and left early. I think there are going to be more floor games for Aaron Jones throughout the season, and I think we're still kind of thinking about the end of last year in Green Bay. That's when things were really clicking. That's when Jordan Love, was playing his best football of the season. When this offense was struggling in the middle of the year, Aaron Jones was also struggling, even when he was healthy. And I think that's what Minnesota could look like for a lot of the season. Like, yes, the workload should be more consistent if he stays healthy, but that's the other biggest concern for me is health is the number one thing. If you told me Aaron Jones, if you told me everybody on this list, not just Aaron Jones, was going to play 17 games, yeah, I would take him higher than his ADP, no question. But the track record is just not there. And I think if your idea is that you're increasing that workload in Minnesota, I think you're just increasing the chances that he gets hurt as he gets another year older.
The Packers have been notoriously aggressive on soft tissue injuries, keeping players out 2-3 more weeks than typical in these scenarios. So I don't put all that on Aaron Jones. You talk about the offensive coordinator stuff too. It felt like Matt LaFleur was dumbing down the offense for all of his young players, and therefore they were struggling. And when Matt LaFleur opened up the playbook, because they had to, or else they were going to just flounder, and Jordan Love wasn't going to look like what he did, then Aaron Jones got involved. Let's just say Kevin O'Connell is going to do that right away. There's no reason for him to make the offense dumbed down with Sam Darnold, who's been the starting quarterback all offseason. Like, I don't – those scenarios that you're presenting with the Packers aren't there in Minnesota.
Okay.
And that's where I go back to Aaron Jones is going to be a focal point. He has to be. And he might get hurt. It's the same concept for James Conner. We have Trey Benson who can draft. If Aaron Jones gets hurt, Ty Chandler can't do Trey Benson stuff. I like the upside scenario. That's why you're getting Aaron Jones in the 6th round instead of the 4th. It's the same with Joe Mixon. Like, the upside for Aaron Jones is he performs as a late 1st round pick. You don't have to draft him that way until 50, 60 picks later, ADP wise. I think he is a total risk reward, but with a lot more reward than the risk that's already baked in.
All right. More running back talk momentarily. Easy for me to say, but we got to tell you about Fantasy Sports Knockout, where Fantasy League meets a knockout pool, an innovative take on fantasy football. The concept is very simple. Choose a new fantasy lineup each week and score points the same way you would in any fantasy league. But you must choose your players wisely. You can only use each player one time. The lowest weekly score or group of scores is eliminated from the contest each week. The concept may be simple, but survival is not. How will you play? Load up early, play the matchup, save your better players for later. Fantasy Sports Knockout. Can you survive the fantasy? Sign up at playfantasysportsknockout.com today. Ramondre Stevenson, Joe, another back that we barely talked about. We did pods throughout the offseason, and it's just, Ramondre Stevenson, he's there. He may be the single most boring pick in fantasy this year. What is the risk-reward calculation for him? Because obviously anytime you're taking any player tangentially related to the New England Patriots, you're going to have to say, well, this might not be a very good offense.
Yeah, and I'm probably at fault for why we haven't talked about Stevenson because it's so boring to me. And I do a lot of the podcast prep, or at least get things set. And just it's not a fun conversation to me at all.
It's a necessary conversation.
Yeah, is it even? I mean, it is necessary. Every running back is necessary. I promise. Ramondre Stevenson's mom will want us to hear him and compliment about that. So you're right. I mean, this is no secret. We're here at Circa Sports. I'm sure the odds of what's the worst offense in the league, the Patriots have to be near the top of that. It makes me really worried. If Drake May were to be confirmed the starter early on, he's just going to naturally raise the floor. And I don't think Jacoby Brissett is a complete nothing at quarterback. It's not like it's the Aiden O'Connell of the world's as backup quarterbacks, but I still think there's some issues. If the Patriots through the first 6 weeks of the season, mid-October, are averaging 14 points a game, under that, would you be all that surprised? Their schedule isn't all that great, I think, to start out things. There's a lot of teams that the Patriots could be worse than, and the offensive line isn't great. You sign Antonio Gibson, I think, for a reason, to be the pass-catching running back. And if you're saying you're going to make Stevenson just be the ball carrier, run between the tackles, in an offense that's not very good, and then Gibson is your James White in this scenario, that's not a lot of attractive stuff. Like, Stevenson, for his fantasy value to be where he is, has to be the pass catcher. Maybe he will. Antonio Gibson gets injured all the time. He wasn't all that good with the Commanders and the opportunities that he had. And it's not like the Patriots signed him to a lot of money. You're not committed to make Gibson a thing.
No.
But there's a reason why they chose to get him among these backup running backs who could have been cheaper too. So I think that matters, but to what extent, I don't know. And when there's a lot of guys like James Conner, like DeAndre Swift, like Najee Harris that I like infinitely more we can get later, I just am going to have zero shares of Ramondre Stevenson this year.
I've been feeling the same way. I've taken him reluctantly in a couple of best balls, but I would, I think like, Javonte Williams presents
That's exactly the
similar
guy. Yes.
upside a round and a half later. I don't even mind, rolling the dice on Najee Harris at this point with the Jalen Warren injury. If you're a Chase Brown guy, you could get him, almost 2 full rounds, even more actually after Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, if you want to chance it on Tajay Spears versus Tony Pollard, I'm on board with that. I mean, there's a reason Ramondre Stevenson is in that final tier of true starting running backs, right? It's Stevenson, it's Swift, it's Amir White, it's now Najee Harris. Javonte Williams is kind of the last guy there. And those are the clear starters. And then you're starting to get into the Raheem Mosterts of the world or the true timeshares, Zach Moss, Chase Brown, et cetera. I think he's being priced appropriately, right? And, I think you can look at the pass catching volume for Ezekiel Elliott last season in New England and say, all right, well, Ramondre Stevenson's definitely a better version of Zeke at this point. And things have changed since then, of course. But Stevenson has always been a very good pass catcher. The volume has been there when healthy over the last couple of years. To me, there aren't very many workload concerns here. It's all about the offense. How productive is this offense? How often are they in the red zone, if ever? How many 19 for 40 type of games are we going to see out of Ramondre Stevenson? It's not PPC, it's PPR. If there are point per carry leagues, Ramondre Stevenson.
Oh, Scott Fishbowl.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I think I'm with you. It's lazy analysis in some ways, but I don't want a lot of pieces of this New England offense, especially if it's my RB2.
I think it's honest analysis. You can say it's lazy, but it's truthful. I mean, like there's a lot of scenarios in which the Patriots are going to be one of the worst in the league. And if they're not, it's that Drake May is way better than what we've seen out of training camp, what we've seen from his college perspective, from the scouts on that. And maybe that's the case. I think the quarterback analysis, especially rookies, is so bad right now between the scouts and everything else. And like CJ Stroud, how many negative things did you hear about him? Then he goes out and explodes right away year one. Like, it's entirely possible that Drake May does that too. And then we're talking about a completely different ceiling. You had John McKechnie on SiriusXM earlier this week, and you're asking, okay, if there was to be a Texans offense from last year who no one thought would be good, but then explodes, who is it? He begrudgingly said the Patriots. And that's the scenario where Ramondre Stevenson becomes better than his fantasy value. Maybe that's it. But to your point, I'll let somebody else get that windfall. I don't really want to have many shares of that offense.
All due respect to John, who made one of the great calls last year and stacking Houston. He was loading up on Stroud, getting all this cheap Nico Collins exposure. He hit that dead on. I do not see New England being that team. I think there's at least a 1 year waiting period here, but we'll see, man. I mean, if Drake May hits the ground running, I guess we have to think of it as we didn't think of Nico Collins as being the guy that he is now this time last year, right? And it's like identifying who that is in New England to me is a tougher task, but they're on that short list, right? I mean, part of it is there's just not that many truly bad offenses. There's not that many candidates for this. It's like you really want to say like, yeah, Carolina, this is the year they take off. It's like, if you're a Will Levis guy, maybe Tennessee, they have some appeal. They at least added some skill players, but we're getting far afield here. Let's try to just go rapid fire through a few more running backs here, Joe, before we head out. So we're now getting into, maybe your second running back, if you really wait and you hammer receivers, you take an early quarterback, you take an early tight end. But for the most part, I'm more comfortable drafting these guys as my RB3. So, we're talking Tony Pollard, who we mentioned, Raheem Mostert, Javonte Williams, Chase Brown, Tajay Spears, Zach Moss, Dawson Eckler, et cetera. I'll let you kind of pick from that group of players or anybody in that range who you want to hit on. And like I said, we'll go through as many names.
The Tajay Spears, Chase Brown duo is definitely enticing for similar reasons. You have Zach Moss in the case of Cincinnati and Tony Pollard in the case of Tennessee, operating as what we would assume the starters. They were paid this offseason to that extent, but Chase Brown and Tajay Spears are more electric, had a per game touch basis where they were clearly the better players. And it's the Zeke Tony Pollard thing from a couple of years ago where why do the Cowboys even use Ezekiel Elliott when Tony Pollard's so much better? And we just saw last year that's not really the case. Offenses use these worst running backs, and I'll put it in quotes because I don't think it's the true statement, but for the ease of this conversation, to let their guys be explosive, whether it be Tajay Spears or Chase Brown. So you might draft Tajay Spears and Chase Brown, assuming they're going to get starter workload. They might, but they won't look as efficient as they did. Maybe Chase Brown's different because he had that Big Ten pedigree where he was the starter. But I think the Bengals, especially with their need this offseason, would have identified him as the guy to do that, and they didn't. They brought in Zach Moss to be that person. So I like the optimism for it, and I get situationally it makes sense, especially in Scott Fishbowl. Tajay Spears brings some punt return yard, upside kick return. But I think I'm just out on that, and I would rather draft, and it's a little bit further, in Ezekiel Elliott, who is the 3-down starter for the Cowboys team. I know it's 5 years post positive stuff for Zeke Elliott, but he's still clearly that guy. I would rather take a Blake Corum, who I think could be that guy if and when Kyren Williams get injured. So we end up taking a step below. It's that tier of running back that I really want to avoid having to be my running back 2. And even at running back 3, there's like a Josh Palmer or Romeo Dobbs or Christian Watson that sometimes fall in that range. That's a roster build that I like infinitely more than having those guys in my running back 3s.
I've been leaning more Spears over Pollard, and maybe part of it is you can get Spears around later. So I just feel a little bit better about the level of investment. They're going about 12 picks apart right now at the NFFC. Pollard's RB27, Spears is RB31. We kind of, Pollard, I feel like, had his chance. And I'm not just saying his career is just done and we have to write him off, but he's going back into a timeshare now. And, maybe he's a back who's better in that role, but I don't know, man. I think at this point in their careers, respectively, like Tajay Spears is the more explosive of the two. If you're like, if
that's fine.
And all the messaging out of Tennessee has been, we like them both. It's going to be a true 50-50. We're going to ride the hot hand. To me, if it's about riding the hot hand, like who's going to be the guy that can quote unquote get hot?
Yeah.
To me, that's Tajay Spears.
Yeah.
It's like that's like if I'm going to be drafting one of these guys as my RB3 with pick 100 overall, I'm going to make the upside play at that point. I'm not looking for safety at pick 100. So that's why I would lean Tajay Spears. I think you could make a similar argument with Chase Brown. I think you drew an accurate parallel there. Austin Eckler, I'm out. I've done multiple videos just telling everybody, please don't draft Austin Eckler. Maybe I'll be wrong. I've been wrong a number of times, arguably more than I've been right. This is one where I would really be surprised if Austin Eckler shows out in Washington. This feels like a bad fit. This feels like, Tracy McGrady on the Atlanta Hawks. I think was a parallel that I drew in one of my videos. It's just one of those like player uniform combinations that just doesn't look good. The eye test can be very dangerous. I just thought Austin Eckler visibly looked like a different player last season. He looked slower. He looked lost. He just didn't look like the same guy. He wasn't playing with that same level of confidence. And, obviously the Chargers devolved into a complete mess last year. So you could argue that with the infusion of talent and optimism in Washington, maybe this isn't like a massive downgrade, but for the first time in his career, he's in a timeshare now with Brian Robinson.
Yeah. Dwayne Wade and like the Cavs or Bulls jerseys, right? That's the same concept for me.
Yep.
If you told me this time next year Austin Eckler is not on a team, he got Kareem hunted and is just not playing anymore, that's got to be the betting favorite at this point for it. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. There are schemes where it would have made sense where Eckler could have been a quality backup, and I understand he was looking for a little bit more money, so you just chase that with the Commanders who are looking for any sort of headlines to make sense. Fine, completely get it. Jaden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury is not it. I got my first and I hope only share of Austin Eckler as a running back 6 in a pseudo dynasty auction league where he was $6.
Yep.
That was well below the Tajay Spears, Tony Pollard price tag. It's like, whatever. He's going to catch some passes. He's going to run the ball a little bit. Makes sense. Eckler shouldn't be drafted in like round 13, much less round 10, where his current ADP range seems to be, or at that point. Yeah, there is zero reason in a redraft format other than you got auto-picked because you weren't paying attention, that Austin Eckler should be on your team.
All right, let's look real quickly, Joe, beyond pick 120. So still plenty of relevant names in that mix. You're starting to look at some of the really less appealing timeshares. Rico Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott basically go back-to-back right now around pick 125. Zach Charbonnet, we're now looking at an 80-pick difference between Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet. I think that is just way too much. I think Charbonnet should be going higher. I think Walker should be going a little bit lower. J.K. Dobbins, Chuba Hubbard, Tyler Algier, some of these higher end, backup type of players. Who stands out to you in this range? Who have you been clicking on? And is there anybody that you're just totally stay away from?
We've talked a lot about J.K. Dobbins at this point, and I think that's one of those, from all reports in the Chargers camp, he's going to be the clear guy, and he's usurped Gus Edwards. Like Gus Edwards will have a role. It'll be basically, if Dobbins were healthy in Baltimore, that he's more of the the goal line specialist, the short yardage guy. He's going to get maybe 10 carries in a game, but they're all going to be one of those, let's run him between the tackles because you want to soften up the defense, and Dobbins will be your electric ball carrier. He's probably not right out of Ohio State electric, but he looks like he's the guy. There's been a lot of really quality guys. Daniel Popper, who I think is one of the best Charger reporters out there, or at least beat reporters overall, has been pretty effusive of his praise for Dobbins. So that's one that I'm buying more. I know that Jim Coventry's probably talked a lot, but we haven't spent a lot of time. Ray Davis is going to make an impact, the rookie running back for the Bills. I do not believe that James Cook is getting as many snaps. It was close to 700 that he got last year. you still have Latavius Murray and the carcass of Leonard Fournette combining for nearly 400 touches. Ray Davis off the rip is going to get more than that. I think closer to a split of, let's just say 650 for James Cook, 550 for Ray Davis. And he can be a pass catcher too. We saw it last year at Kentucky where he got over 30 catches. I think Ray Davis is entirely undervalued. The answer before had been Kamani Vidal, who's been inconsistent in training camp. Ray Davis has been awesome in every opportunity he's got. We've heard glowing reports from the Buffalo guys. I will have probably 100% exposure over the last 3 weeks of drafts to Ray Davis. He is my guy that I'm targeting quite a bit.
Okay. I like that one. I'm not proud to admit this. I'm still loading up on Tyler Algier shares late in drafts. Like he's going so late. We're talking close to pick 150 right now at the NFFC, and I'll try to give you a number in terms of where he's going in ESPN leagues. Yeah, after 150, Fantrax, he's after 150 as well. So we're talking late enough in the draft that you can start kind of firing some darts. And I don't view it as like I'm not buying into what Atlanta is saying of, hey, this is still going to be a 2-back system. Like we know right. Bijan is good, but we want to make room for Tyler Algier. I'm just almost looking at it as like Bijan Robinson insurance.
Sure.
Certainly if I take Bijan earlier in the draft, I want to have Tyler Algier because you don't have to really pay up very much for that handcuff. But even if Bijan Robinson goes down, like Tyler Algier has proved it. And I still think like even if Bijan is healthy and you have to throw Algier in your lineup, you have like a bye-week apocalypse and you're just like, whatever, I got to roll out Algier. Like I still think there's somewhat of a bankable floor here. Like to me, there are kind of a lot of throwaway picks when you start to get into the running back, 40 to 50 to 60. And, those guys aren't separated by that many rounds. And I still think Algier to me is not that you're looking for safety at that point in your draft, but if you are, I think he's still a relatively high floor option as far as RB48s go.
That's totally fine. We understood this concept 2 years ago with Alexander Madison and Delvin Cook. I keep going back to it because that's the premier handcuff scenario where he was being drafted the way he was because there's injury certainties. We don't assume Bijan Robinson has any injury certainties. That's why Tyler Algier is lower on that list, but it's the same exact concept, and I totally agree. I probably won't have any shares of Algier only because I am trying to get my 5th running back, maybe 6th running back by round 12, by round 13, and therefore I don't need to take any of those, what you had mentioned, what was it, just wasted picks or whatever it is, those running backs. There are a ton. There are so many littered at the back end. It's like I don't even know why they're getting drafted. It's a weird scenario, I think, for a lot of drafts out there. But Algier makes total sense if you are just betting or on the off chance that Bijan Robinson gets hurt.
All right, man. Good stuff, Joe. We'll wrap this up. I want to thank our presenting sponsors today, Fantasy Sports Knockout. You can go check them out at fantasysportsknockout.com. Fantrax, if you're looking for any kind of upgrades with your league hosting, go do it over at Fantrax, fantrax.com/RotoWire. You can sign up today, enter that contest to win free tickets for you and your entire league to go to any NFL game you want. And last but not least, of course, the Circa Resort and Casino. Go sign up, Circa Million, Circa Survivor. You got a couple weeks to get those entries in, circasports.com for all the details. We want to, of course, thank Circa for all the hospitality this week. It's been fantastic. We'll be doing a couple more podcasts tomorrow. We'll be doing live radio on Sirius XM later today, so you can check that out. We'll have Derek Stevens on. We'll have Mike Palm on from Circa. We'll be on live during 2 preseason games. Colts Bengals. Colts are playing Anthony Richardson tonight.
Let's
Looking
go.
forward to that. We got Bears Chiefs later tonight as well. But that's going to do it for myself and Joe Bartel. More RotoWire pods coming your way tomorrow.